everyone. Welcome to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. I appreciate you joining me for another episode, and I'm really excited today. I have a guest for the first time on the program, Pastor Paul Stephenson, and you might recognize him from a video I shared a couple weeks ago where he made a really good video about will the true Israel please stand up, and I really enjoyed hearing that, and it's exciting to just see other preachers standing for the truth on these things and in other parts of the world. And if you don't know Pastor Stephenson, he is from down under in Australia. And so we're going to go ahead and introduce him to let him introduce himself to you. And so Pastor Stephenson, thank you for coming on the program, and just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and about your ministry.
Oh, thank you, Pastor McMurtry. I appreciate that, and excited to be on today, and have enjoyed, as I said before, enjoyed the Spirit of Prophecy podcast, and what a challenge that's been. And as a pastor, I've enjoyed being challenged, and it's something I never want to stop learning. So some things that you've shared on the Spirit of Prophecy podcast has been a real blessing. So my name's as you know, Paul Stephenson. I was saved in an independent fundamental Baptist church in 1980, so it's going back a little ways now, and grew up in the independent fundamental Baptist because I was saved when I was 10. Went to Bible college through an independent fundamental Baptist Bible college, and was an associate pastor for a while, and then went into pastoring and church planting. So I've pastored two churches, and the church that I'm in now is the third church that we've planted. So it's been an exciting journey, exciting to be in the ministry. I've been married 34 years to Tracy. We've got 4 adult children now who are a great blessing and are in church and in the ministry. So appreciate that. And I've got 1 grandson. So things are going very well. And at the moment, we pastor Open Door Bible Church, which is an independent fundamental Baptist church, though I know the name Baptist is not in the church, and I wouldn't have done that many years ago, but there's some reasons behind that, why we did that. But we are an independent fundamental Baptist church, hold to the doctrines and King James only and all of that. So that's, I guess, a little bit about myself.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's interesting too, because some of the questions I have for you, and for those watching, this is the first time me and Pastor Stephenson have spoken with each other. We just spoke very briefly before the program, so I'm learning about him, and that's kind of what this program is. I want to, on this podcast, just introduce other people who have good beliefs and something that they can contribute. And I don't know Pastor Stephenson's position and everything, and not everybody I have in the program just lines up to a T with me. Some people are very different, and I don't have all the answers on this. I just like to talk about all the questions and give my opinions, which is a lot of what I do. And so one of the things, though, that I'm planning on asking you about, though, is just kind of church culture in Australia, especially IFB and all that. But the first question I have to ask you, though, because this came up from the video I shared of you, are you a Freemason? So I have to insert something for myself here. I had his audio wrong, so we cannot hear his response, but he is not a Freemason. And he thought that was kind of funny, and he kind of laughed because I guess Americans make a big deal about that and are suspicious and stuff. And so I just wanted to insert that in here. The audio was gone. Pastor Stephenson is not a Freemason. Yeah. Well, and that's something that I personally find fascinating, talking to people from other countries, especially Christians from other countries, is I think we often fail to separate what about us is cultural versus biblical. We think everything that we do, how we act, how we sing, our style, we think it's all straight out of the Bible. But our culture does rub off on us more than we want to admit. And so I think it's interesting when you talk to people from other countries who have the same religious beliefs, about a lot of these things. And it kind of helps you separate the culture from actually the doctrine. But one thing I don't know about, I don't know a lot of people from Australia. I've not talked with many, but typically, if I talk to somebody from another country who is in a fundamental Baptist church, it seems like a lot of times their pastor isn't even from that country. It's an American missionary. And so when it comes to independent fundamental Baptist churches, is there a lot of American influence, do you think, in those type of churches in Australia? And is there maybe another culture of IFB? Because you mentioned too how your church doesn't have the name Baptist. You want to maybe explain how some of that works in Australia?
Amount of American influence and something, the the Americans often get blamed for a lot of things, but we're very thankful for the American missionaries. The first American independent fundamental Baptist missionary that came to Australia was in 1966. That's when independent Baptist churches began here in Australia, and that was by a man by the name of Randy Pike. And from the time of Randy Pike, from 66 until now, we've had a great influence by American missionaries. And the major influence, I would say, would have been the BBF missionary, the Baptist Bible Fellowship. A lot of churches here in Australia were started by Bible Baptist Fellowship missionaries and were very, very successful. Mainly situated around New South Wales, Sydney, if you get a map of Australia down there. But now I think the greatest amount of American influence or missionaries would be over in Western Australia. There's a large amount over there from America. So a major influence from BBF. And then the next would be Bob Jones University. So there's a few BJU missionaries that are here. And also Hyles Anderson back in the day. I don't think too many Hyles Anderson guys come out now. I haven't seen too many of them come out. And a couple from Crown College from Tennessee. So I would say all churches back in the day were started by American missionaries. Now I think there's more Australians that are taking churches and pastoring churches and even planting some churches. Americans are still coming over. So they're still coming over and starting churches. But yeah, America has had a great influence from a Christian perspective, but also from an independent fundamental Baptist perspective.
So if BBF had a big influence, do you guys fight all the time about closed communion versus open communion in Australia?
There was one fellowship meeting and all of pastors would go there, right? Until there was the big fight over local church, universal church, closed communion, open, all that sort of stuff. So there was a big fight and it split. So the fellowship meeting now is split. There's the National Baptist Fellowship meeting once a year, and at the same time, there's the Baptist Pastors Fellowship meeting, which is predominantly Baptist Bride. That's the Baptist Bride group, you know what I mean? So there's probably not so much fighting now. We just don't talk to one another.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, that's good. You know, I'm glad America was influential in getting fundamental Baptists over there. But it sounds like they actually succeeded in getting Australians trained to where, you know, you actually have Australian pastors, which it seems like in a lot of countries where Americans have been for years, they never have indigenous pastors. And I think that's a good sign. So, so you definitely, that's good. I'm glad to hear that, you know, obviously some of the political stuff.
Early in the part, a lot of our guys would go to America to be trained. So a number of Aussie guys went to BBC in Springfield, Missouri. And actually one Aussie guy that went over there in the late or mid 70s, he actually came back. When he came back, graduated, he planted a church in Adelaide, South Australia, another state. And that became one of our largest churches in Australia. I think when he stepped down, the church had about 300 people in it, which was very big back in the day, because the average size of the church in Australia, an independent fundamental Baptist church, it would be around about 50, I would say, the average size. So, you know, when we get to something like 100, 150, 200, whatever, that's big for us. You know, we don't have the mega church, independent fundamental Baptist mega church over here. We've got a few charismatic mega churches, but I think at the moment, our largest independent fundamental Baptist church would be around about 250, again 300. So I don't think we've ever really reached the 500 size mark. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Despite all of that. So yeah, we had some of our guys go over to get trained in America, but then BBF guy, Pastor Matthews, he started Sydney Bible Baptist College back in Sydney in the mid 70s, I think it was. So that's really our main independent fundamental Baptist Bible college that we have here, where students will go.
Okay. So what would be, because I know there's others that I know about too in Australia that are IFB in doctrine, but not, they don't put it on the name. So what's the reason for not using the name so much?
Oh, look, I think there's churches over here that have the name Baptist who are not, but then there are those, and those of us that don't have the name Baptist in our sign, we are Baptist, and I don't know, and I can't speak for other guys. I mean, Bible Church, we're not part of the Bible Church movement. I know the Bible Church movement is a big thing. We're not that. The reason why we voted, I guess, on going either Open Door Baptist Church or Open Door Bible Church was predominantly because in our area we've had a number of independent Baptist pastors fall from grace, if you please. And we've still got a little bit of back in the 2000s. There was a church here in Queensland where pedophilia had come in and really damaged the lives of a lot of people, and that now that happened back in the early 2000s. There's still issues with that even today. So where we planted Open Door, that's really in an area where all of that problem happened. We've had pastors that have gone to court and got done for stalking and perversion, and we've had pastors done for whoremongering and embezzlement and things of that nature. So my reason for not doing that is because the blackened eye, I guess, if you please, it's really taken a bit of a hit. So it's a little bit of a talking point, when you go somewhere, oh, you're not Baptist because you don't have the name Baptist in your sign. Well, we are, you know what I mean? It's just that we've chosen to go the way we have because of certain things that happen. Now, some guys might say, well, bless God, you ought to just, fly the flag anyway. And I get that. And I like I said a few years ago, probably would have done that. It's funny because the first church that I pastored, I took over from an American missionary whose pastor was Wayne Williams, which is who Pastor Matt first took over from is it Dakota there. So actually I emailed Pastor First the other day to get some books and mentioned the pastor's name. He went, oh, that's a name from the past. So, when I took over that church, there was a dark cloud over that church in regards to some financial dealings as well. And I was getting phone calls from lawyers and all of that in regards to everything. So I still kept the name Baptist there, but this time I've just chosen to go down a different path just to see perhaps, how it would turn out. Now, I could always change it back to Open Door Baptist Church if I wanted to. But as far as others, I'm not sure. I really couldn't speak for them as to why perhaps they leave the name Baptist out instead of putting it in. But that's really the main reason. And we want to be known as Bible too. Some people say, well, if you're Baptist, you're Bible and all this sort of stuff. Well, I've come to the opinion now that just because you've got the name Baptist on your church sign, it doesn't mean that you're Bible. You know what I mean? Because I guess there's a lot of different beliefs out there and so on. So, yeah, it's not that we're not independent fundamental Baptists. We've just chosen not to put the name in there at this stage. It could change later on, but
right. Well, yeah, I know some pastors who have really struggled in their areas because the Baptist name had been so run through the mud because of those very things, and it did create real challenges for them. And and ultimately, it's an identifier, but in some places it might identify you with stuff you don't want to be identified. So I can definitely understand that. And so for the doctrinal police watching too, you can fall from grace in your community, which is what I'm assuming you meant by that. But for all the goofballs out there, but yeah. So obviously, I've got a few more questions just about things in Australia, but this is ultimately mainly about prophecy and eschatology and Israel and things like that. And so I really enjoyed your video about Israel. When I was listening to it, the points you were making, it was very obvious that you knew your stuff, that you were on the right track and everything, and you have the right position. You kind of had your own ways. I heard of putting things that I thought was just really good, some just really good points. So I guess is like in America, it's like if you're IFB, you're almost always, most of the time, it's going to be pre-trib, very pro-Zionist. Is that how it is typically in Australia with Baptist churches?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I only know of a few guys here that are post-trib pre-wrath. And one guy in New South Wales, when he came out about it, David Cloud actually sent him a message saying he wants his ordination papers back.
Oh.
And everyone's separated from this guy. You know what I mean? Like he had other
Mm-hmm.
pastors that were at his church, and the moment he came out on a different position, they all just left. You know what I mean? Because it's not right. It's heresy. You know what I mean? There's another brother up here who's a good friend of mine, brother Kevin. He's post-trib pre-wrath, and brother Kevin, he's I guess he's with the we're associated with Stephen Anderson crowd, because Stephen Anderson came on the scene in a big way probably a few years ago with stuff, and when he came out in Australia with his position, all the other independent fundamental Baptist churches are like, you know what I mean? And if you hold to a different position, you're an Andersonite and all this sort of stuff. And so there's me, there's brother Kevin, there's brother Charlie down there in New South Wales, and a few other guys, like the gentleman that I took over from in my first pastorate. Obviously, he's post-trib pre-wrath, but he's not pastoring anymore. And I think there's another American guy who also his pastor was Wayne Williams. I think he's back in the States though. So there's probably only, not even 5 of us that hold to the post-trib pre-wrath. There's a gentleman pastor in South Australia who sort of, he's studying it out. He's looking at it and asking questions and so on. So, but that's the thing. It's like if you come to a different position on, pre-tribulation, then you're basically wiped. You know what I mean? Like you don't get fellowshipped with, you don't get invited to stuff and all of that. So I've just come to the conclusion that I'll believe what I'll believe if it's biblical, and if I don't get to fellowship, then that's so be it. You know what I mean? Just part of it. But yeah, majority over here are pre-trib.
Okay.
You've got all the adjectives. We are post-trib, pre-millennial, non-charismatic, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Right. Well, for sure, and this might bother some pre-tribbers, but it's just a fact. If you're very divisive and are breaking fellowship over those things, that's a cultural thing. You don't become divisive about and break fellowship over that just because of your Bible convictions. And it's just,
right.
And so with the American influence that's over there, then that doesn't surprise me. And that was one of the things I wondered about, if everybody fought over there over eschatology as much as they do over here. And so the other thing too, when it comes to the subject, of Zionism, Zionism, it's like it's patriotism over here. We have Baptists all over. They wear the lapel pins. It's got an American flag on one side and the Israeli flag on the other side. America in our politics, it's very pro-Israel, which I feel like it's the Republicans pandering to the Christian and the evangelicals. I don't think most of them really care that much. I think it's pandering, but so I think there's a lot of political influence, because Baptists over here, they watch a lot of Fox News and Newsmax, and all that stuff is very pro-Israel. So when it comes to the Australian politics, are they also very pro-Zionist and aligned with Israel? And if they are, do you think that influenced Baptists that way in your area, or is it just not as big of a thing?
Australian media over here definitely are pro-Israel. You know what I mean? Like you get the news media over here and everything's, Israel and against Hamas. And even here in Australia recently, Palestinians here in Queensland and New South Wales have sort of, marched and come out against, you guys are pro-Israel and all of this, dealing with Australian politics. So yeah, very, very heavily. We're very left leaning in our media over here in Australia. I don't think there's only one news media that really is a little bit more balanced than others. But Australian politics here, it's very different here in Australia to America. America, patriotism in America and flying the flag and, having your 4th of July and walking through churches, waving flags and all this sort of stuff. You don't get that here.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get that here. You might have Australian churches with an Australian flag and a Christian flag up the back and all of that, but you won't see in Australian churches what you'll see in America churches. Our media doesn't really affect us here. Again, what affects us here in Australia when it comes to that is America. So, we don't, whether you're Democrat or Republican over here, to us is like, well, whatever, but it's what comes from Lancaster Baptist Church, or what comes from, you name it. You name the big churches. It's like what's fed down through that here into Australia. That's what affects us. Okay. You know what I mean? So if Paul Chappell goes this way, then it's like, oh, it must be right. You know what I mean? Let's go over here, and so we are very much affected by Zionism from that regards. You know what I mean? I would say all independent fundamental Baptist churches here in Australia would be pro-Israel.
Okay.
So, yeah. So again, when you come out and you start saying, well, who is the real Israel? You know what I mean? And you start teaching, well, Israel in the flesh or Old Covenant Israel, that's not God's chosen people for today. You're a heretic. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you can't say that, Yeah. So in that regard, it's similar.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because even in the Bible, the early churches, they were all started by Jews. They were the original evangelists and everything. And one thing they all dealt with was just that, Judaism kind of creeping in to those churches. It was like they were kind of bringing some of the culture with them, and they didn't need all of it. And I really feel like American missionaries have done that. Is, we've brought a lot of good doctrine in things, because I think doctrinally IFB is solid for the most part, but we do seem to bring a lot of cultural junk with us. And so one thing I got to ask about too, in Australia, because I know this is a cultural thing, but in the South, in the Bible Belt, people get real excited, sometimes run what we call glory laps. Do you guys ever do it? Does that ever go on anywhere in Australia where people get up and run around the auditorium and stuff like that when they get excited?
No, mate, you'd be classed as charismatic if you did that here. You know what I mean? Like we are very. Now here's the struggle that I have, right? Mm-hmm. I've never seen the glory laps here, and I probably wouldn't promote that. I understand American churches in the South, and I don't have an issue. If that we've had some of our guys go to Sammy Allen's camp meeting down in Resaca, Georgia. And one guy went there and he was actually freaked out, with all the screaming and the running. He's like, what in the world is this, The problem that we've got in Australia is that we're very British. We're very English to the point where we don't say amen. We like to nod our head, you know what I mean? So we're not very verbal in our amen and praise the Lord and all of that. Now, I'd like to see that change because I believe, to say amen and, to praise the Lord, even – please forgive me, but to raise your hands and praise the Lord, I see as a biblical thing. Mm-hmm. I don't see it as a charismatic thing. I see it as a biblical thing. And trying to get Australians to do that is like, wow, getting them out of their comfort zone. Whereas in America, in the South, it's a little bit more easier. The Northern, you guys are North, because I've been to California, and I was told that you can't gauge America based on California. Mm-hmm. I went to the leadership conference in Lancaster, and I've been to a leadership conference at Doug Fisher's church in San Diego. And again, there was a difference, I guess, in those two churches. Brother Fisher's church down the south, they were very vocal and praising God and shouting and all of that, whereas to the north in Lancaster, they were probably a little bit more reserved or conservative, if we put it that way. But so it's different. It's different here in Australia, big time, big time.
Yeah, well, because in some of those churches in the South, I've literally heard preachers act like, if you're not doing the shouting and running all that, you don't have the Holy Ghost, and it's just like these things would never happen in most cultures. And this is a cultural thing you all are doing. And again,
Mm.
I wish, I'm in Northern Illinois. I wish our culture was a little more excited too. I don't know if I want people running glory laps, but
No, I'm the same.
I have preached in the South before, and it can be more. It's definitely more enjoyable, when people are getting excited and shouting and hollering, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's an interesting thing when you ask yourself, like, when it comes to your standards, when it comes to your practices, are they Bible based or culturally based? And I think it's okay to try to have a culture, promote a culture, but we just need to call that what it is. It's culture, not
Yeah.
necessarily Bible. And let's not cream the church that culturally maybe is a little bit different than us, as long as it's something that's not sinful. Obviously, there's some cultural things that are sinful, and I'm always trying to sort that out in my mind, especially when I see something in another country, and I'm
Right.
like, oh, that seems weird to me that they're doing that, but it's like, well, I guess it's not unbiblical, but
Yeah.
that we couldn't do that over here because it would weird everybody out, and in
Well,
America.
our church music culture here would probably lean more towards BJU.
Mm-hmm.
So, when it comes to singing here, again, there's differences in America, obviously. When it comes to instrumentation and so on, there's such a vast difference, in independent fundamental Baptist churches in America and Australia. But, we lean more towards the BJU, the very, I call it stoic, very proper. You can't hold your microphone. If you hold your microphone, that's of the devil sort of thing. And that's very sensual and all this sort of stuff. And the music is very, I call it not very exciting at all. I like to sing. See, I think we can sing the hymns without it being a funeral dirge. You know what I mean? Like, I think we can sing the hymns where there's a little bit more, excitement to. I'm not saying going wild or anything like that, but come on. I mean, you think about our hymns, you think about there's power in the blood. There's nothing worse than singing there's power in the blood and you look like a stone statue. You know what I mean? Like, so that's another thing that we have over here too, which some guys have tried to change that. And my pastor that I was under, who actually trained me, he brought a bass guitar. We had a bass guitar in the church. It wasn't an electric. It was a proper bass guitar. And we had another pastor here write him a letter telling him that he shouldn't use that bass guitar because it looks like a male sex organ, right? So that's the I mean, that's the sort of stuff we get. I know, it's like crazy stuff, you know what I mean? So he was like given a hard time because he had a bass guitar in there, It's like, well,
I think I'd be marking that dude as a pervert if he sees a guitar and then sees that in his mind.
We were like, what in the world? Where is this guy's mind? You know what I mean?
Wow.
But anyway, that's a little bit. That's just a little bit of the stuff we get. I mean, we've been to meetings where it's like, we had Sam Davison come over this number of years ago now, and we had a meeting in Sydney, and some of the churches that sang, they held the microphone and everything. And then after the meeting, letters were sent out saying, "Oh no, you shouldn't." Like just the whole politics of it really turns a lot of people off. It turns a lot of preachers off, and they don't go to meetings because of that.
Yeah, you guys have definitely got a lot of American influence because we fight about stupid stuff like that over here too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why Americans fit so well here, and when we go to America, we fit well over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when it comes to your eschatology, have you always believed the way you do, or how did you come to your position? Were you trained pre-trib and all that stuff?
Yeah, trained pre-trib. I basically believed what I believed because that's what we were taught, to my shame. You know what I mean? Like, when you're being taught, you're taught those things, and we were always taught here not to question the pastor. If he says something, you don't question him at all. And my pastor that trained me said, always encourage questions, and that's how people learn. So, and I get the fact that there's, you can question in a negative sense and so on. I get that. But basically, yeah, taught pre-trib, basically preached pre-trib because that's what I was taught. Never studied it for myself.
Mhm.
I'll be honest, never studied it for myself. Just believe what I believe because that's what we were told. That's what we are. When I took over, Sunshine Baptist Church here in Queensland from the American brother who's Pastor Wayne Williams, when I was walking through the church, I found a box and I come across Roland Rasmussen's where is that? Over there. There you go. And I read that. So this was back in 2009. Okay. So back in 2009, I read that book, but I looked at it through the eyes of the pre-trib and, that's not what we are. So I just basically put it aside, just didn't worry about it. And so, I would talk to some other friend like Brother Kevin up here, who's my friend. He would talk to me about it. And we were friends, even though I was on a different page than what he was. And, he shared some things with me and I just like, oh, no, that we don't believe in that, And then, of course, as I said before, when, Stephen Anderson, when he didn't actually come to Australia, he's not allowed to come to Australia. But when his teaching on, the post-trib pre-wrath position came in, that just like, it just went out and preachers were preaching against it and all the negativity that was preached against that. And so, my position was, well, I'm pre-trib because that's what I've been told. All right. And what started for me was about 5 years ago. I was visiting an independent Baptist church on a Sunday night, and the pastor was preaching out of the Gospel of Mark. He was preaching through Mark, and he was in Mark 13. And when he was preaching through Mark 13, going through the Olivet Discourse in Mark 13, when he got to the part where, Jesus coming in the clouds. Now, let me explain. I'll put a disclaimer here. This wasn't audible, but it was like the Spirit of God said to me, you need to study that. You need to look at that. So from that time on, I went home and I looked at all the references of Christ coming in the clouds and, saw when that came. It was after the tribulation. And so I love connecting dots. So I'm looking at it in the New Testament, Revelation. I'm looking at it in the Old Testament. And then I started looking at the difference between the day of Christ and the day of the Lord. All those. So for me, it's been a bit of a journey for the last 5 years, stemming from just that one time in that church meeting where I really sensed the Spirit of God saying, you need to check when I come back in the clouds. You know what I mean? So no, I've not always been post-trib, pre-wrath. I've mainly been a pre-trib until 5 years ago. And now I'm very safe. I'm very secure on the post-trib pre-wrath. I generally call it pre-wrath because over here, when you mention post-trib, they think, that's at the end of 7 years. So you believe you go and that. So to try and minimize any confusion from my perspective, I often say, no, I'm not pre-trib, I'm pre-wrath.
Mm.
We're not appointed to wrath. We're not appointed to the day of the Lord. And again, over here, there's some guys here that did that in their churches because they hear that there are guys who are going pre-wrath, so we better start preaching some stuff. One guy did 5 messages on the rapture, and that was it. And I listened to that, and most of that stuff was filled with, and you can tell when messages are filled with commentaries. You know what I mean? This is what this guy said, and it was just straight from the playbook. You know what I mean? And so like that was 5 messages, and another guy in Sydney did some messages on the rapture and that. And but again, it was only a few messages. Where I think if you're gonna do the subject justice, it's such a big topic. You don't just give 5 weeks to it. You've got to really teach it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I've never taught through Revelation. I have never taught through Revelation. I was always afraid of it. I was always taught it's confusing. I was always taught, it's all jumbled up and all this sort of stuff. But probably when I finished teaching through our doctrinal statement in our church, then I've said to our church, we're going to go through the book of Revelation and we're going to study that as a church. So they're all excited about that. Most of the folks in our church, probably except for 1 or 2, are on the same page as what I am, which is a blessing. But again, I've tried to make what I believe as far as a pre-wrath, rapture of the church. I've tried to not make it divisive. Like I actually don't believe that it's a doctrine you divide over.
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading Brother First. I'm going to get a copy of my own, but one of the guys from church loaned me that, and it was just amazing. Reading through that, how that years and years ago, preachers never divided over the subject eschatology, because you know what I mean? Like they just, I don't know whether it was a maturity thing or what, but they just agreed to disagree. You know, you had some guys that had different, and that was fine. You know what I mean? But whereas now we've made it a standard of separation. Like if you're not pre-trib, I don't want anything to do with you. So my journey's been exciting. I'm still learning. Like I said, you know, I watch your podcast and there's some stuff on there that really challenges my thinking, and I'm grateful for it. And I'll look at it and I'll study it. The same with who is Israel, you know what I mean? Like always taught, well, you know, the Israel over there, that they're the people of God. And you know, Romans chapter 2 is very clear. You know, you read Romans 9, 10, 11 is very clear. But again, it's like I think God's got to open the eyes to it. You know, God's got to, and I'm grateful that the Lord tried to open my eyes up to it, like I said, back in 2009. I just wasn't willing to look at it. I was just, you know, no, that's just not right. You know what I mean? But until a time where God said, right, now you need to look at this. And I think I love teaching on it. And I don't have a lot of fellowship with pastors over here for a number of reasons, basically centered around what you believe. And I feel, and that's why I think for me, I have a little bit of an I don't care attitude. I'm gonna preach and teach what I believe the Bible says, because I really don't have any associations or connections that I'm worried about. Oh, what will they say? You know what I mean? Whereas the other guys are really afraid of losing their associations with their pastor group. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the journey for me has been exciting, and I would say still going. You know, it's still going. I'm settled that it's pre-wrath. I'm settled that you know, I'm still again going through that Olivet, what you're teaching, where some's already come to pass and some of it is yet to come, and all of that, and I can see that. And so going through that, and that's basically my journey.
Well, yeah, that's interesting too, because I am convinced that what made this become a divisive thing, it was the hype of things in the 70s, Late Great Planet Earth, Thief of the Night, that the evangelicals, the TV preachers started getting big. That's when it got cemented in everybody's head. Before that, there was a variety of opinions seemed to be allowed. And so we kind of had several decades where, at least within the fundamental Baptist world, no one questioned pre-trib. And I'm thankful for, you know, guys like Roland Rasmussen. I have it too. I don't agree with everything he has in here, but here's what he did though. He got a lot of things right that the Baptist world had wrong. I think other guys that came along after him, I think guys like Steven Anderson had more right than Roland Rasmussen had right. Now, I don't think he has everything exactly. I don't think I have everything exactly right. But at the same time, what we're starting to see is, you know, I think for a long time, if you were anything but pre-trib, you know, you were deplatformed in the Baptist world because you got kicked out of every group. But, you know, thankfully guys like him, you know, put out books. You know, you had Anderson with the internet, you know, and now we've got other guys writing books too. I think some of Matt Furse's books have been influential. I think it's kind of helping get more things right. And really, I do not see myself as, you know, a leader or an authority on these things. I use my podcast and any influence I have to get people talking. Hey, we need to talk more about this aspect of it, because I think we still have more to learn. I think we've gotten way too dogmatic on some things where we probably shouldn't be. You know, let's explore this. Let's talk about this. Let's put our heads together and explore these things. And I think, you know, Baptists are getting closer to the truth. And I think the more too, we can just break up the stronghold of the pre-trib and the pro-Zionist thing, the more it's going to get people looking and thinking. And I am still exploring. I am still learning. Well, as of this broadcast, I will appreciate it. But my message on Sunday night, while we're right now, I'm so excited about preaching it. I mean, I learned something when I was reading Hebrews. I noticed something it said in there that made me completely rethink how I view, well, first off, I had that passage in Hebrews wrong, but it has me looking at something in the Gospels just completely different. I'm just like, this is huge proof. How much stuff is there like this? But when you those dispensational teachings we had,
Yeah.
the way I say it put brick walls up in people's
Yeah.
theology. And once you get through those things, it's like we find all these new areas of doctrine that we can explore and that we can learn from. And so I'm thankful for trailblazers that have been out there that have kind of created an environment where people now have some more things to explore. And, Rasmussen didn't find everything. Anderson didn't find everything. I didn't find everything. But I believe all those guys, and I'm hoping I can do this too, we're creating an environment where in the Baptist world, you are allowed to study these things and look into
Right.
them. And you don't have to be bound by the politics of it all, because it's political. And so I'm kind of disappointed. I had a feeling it was probably the same way in Australia, but I was wondering if you guys are like us over there when it comes to that.
Yeah. Thank you, America.
Yeah.
No, look, very, very, very dispensational. I mean, that's what you're taught here. You study the Bible. The right way to study the Bible is dispensationally. All right. So that's what you're taught. And it is a stumbling block. It's so hard to get that thinking out of your brain. You know what I mean? To not look at it through the eyes of dispensationalism. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is I've never been a commentary reader. I've never, like, I used to have a Schofield Reference Bible many, many years ago. But when the Lord called me to preach, my pastor gave me a Sunday school to teach, and he gave me the regular Baptist Press Sunday school curriculum and all of that. Okay, nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to use, that's fine. But I said to the Lord, Lord, if you've called me to preach, then I need to learn how to get messages from you through the scripture instead of relying on other people's notes. So I've never been a Matthew Henry fan. I've never been into commentary, J. Vernon McGee and all of that. I've never read them. Schofield probably has been the big influence in lives over here because of Jack Hyles. Now, when I was saved in 1980, Jack Hyles was the man over here. I mean, we had his church manual, our tape ministry was Jack Hyles and Bob Gray and all of those guys back in the day. So, Jack Hyles was someone who did promote the Schofield Reference Bible, though there were times where he said, I don't agree with all of his notes. But we all had Schofield Reference Bibles over here because you listen to Jack Hyles and the guy who did his Bible reading would say, now turn to page number 100 in your Schofield Reference Bible. And what I found is I was always going to Schofield's notes when I was reading the Bible, and I thought, I can't do that. So it's like I got rid of all study Bibles. I didn't want a study Bible, and the Bible I got now has got no notes in it, So dispensationalism over here is just as big as what it is over there, probably because of the influence of American colleges over here and so on, But yeah, it's a big stumbling block. And I got to take my hat off to Roland Rasmussen because when he brought that book out, he would have been shunned big time, I guess, by the brethren over there. And so it was a big deal. My question is, I wonder whether his son, I think Tim, now passes the church there. Now I wonder if he's the same position, or did Roland's position on that just basically die with him? You know what I mean? And if the pastor there now, if Tim's position is pre-wrath, and I've known him to preach at Lancaster before too, so. I think Lancaster and as at Faith Baptist Church in Canoga Park there, they still have a relationship together. So it's very interesting, I guess what's happening today and the groundbreaking stuff that's come out, So very thankful for guys like that. But yeah, Schofield dispensationalism, big thing over here, big thing.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of churches too, where guys believe right, but they're just quiet about it. They don't put their stuff online, and and it's too bad because I would like them to be more vocal, because one, there's a lot of people looking for churches that believe right, but then two,
Right.
the more of us there are, the more people aren't going to feel like a freak. And because the thing is, when I first started becoming aware that the pre-trib might not be right and the dispensationalism might not be right, I mean, in my world, I wasn't familiar with, I didn't know who Roland Rasmussen was. I didn't know who Anderson was. I didn't know who these guys were. And so, but it was around that time that Anderson started getting bigger, promoting the post-trib. And so I started hearing people talk about it. And so that just kind of got my interest even more. So then when I found out, and even at the time, I'd only listened to a little bit of his stuff. I knew he was post-trib, but I didn't know he was also non-dispensational. And I remember I had come to the conclusion that dispensationalism's garbage. I went and I pulled this book out again, Dispensational Truth, and read it again. And I got done reading it, and I'm like, that book is garbage. Dispensationalism is garbage. And I remember I was encouraged because right around that time, I came across a sermon by David Berzins, who was also out of Anderson's church, and he had preached a sermon against dispensationalism. Because I felt like I was the only Baptist in the world who was non-dispensational. That's how I was in my mind. Now, since then, I've learned that there are many Baptists that are non-dispensational. I even know some pre-trib, pro-Israel, non-dispensational Baptists. There's a lot of Baptists who have recognized just the many heresies in that teaching. And so, but again, those guys have been canceled in the IFB. And so, at least in our world, we have the fellowship, through the internet and things like that where we can communicate. But yeah, guys like Rasmussen, he wouldn't have had that, and so you really gotta, tip your hat to guys like him that took the heat and, probably lost a lot of friends for the position. But I will say too, though, that, it's gotten to the point now where, I am able to fellowship with a lot of pre-tribbers. They'll come preach for me. For a while, they wouldn't. For a while, I couldn't get people to come preach for me. I don't preach for that many pre-tribbers. I do very rarely, and typically ones that don't have an online ministry, so it's not like seen in the online world. I'll get invited to their meetings, and I'm able to go and fellowship, and I get along with them great. But I do think the time is getting close to where, people like us will be more common, accepted. And it's because even the people who haven't changed, and some guys, they've been preaching for they're not going to change at this point. But I do think they're realizing, it's not as clear cut as they thought. We probably could give these people a chance. They're solid on the other doctrines. And I'm thankful for that because I enjoy fellowship with my pre-trib brethren because there's a lot of good people in that world.
Well, I think we've got to extend grace to each other. You know what I mean? It's like, because, if you've got the fundamentals down, salvation and so on, okay, you may be a little bit different over here, but, it doesn't affect salvation. We ought to allow each other whatever happened to, the Baptist acronym, Bible is sole authority, but then you've got individual soul liberty. And to me, individual soul liberty is the right for you or I to study the scriptures, and if I come to a different position, as long as it's not heretical, if I come to a different position on the rapture, then where is the grace extended? You know what I mean? But you come to a different position, like over there, like it is over here, and you're blackballed. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you're a heretic. You're this. You're that. We don't. Oh, you can come to our conference, right? But you can sit there. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't see myself anytime soon getting invited to preach in any of our what we call major conferences over here, and I'm okay with that. I really am. I'm okay with that. I love my local church. I want to teach the folks in my local church, and if I never get invited to preach anywhere else, that's great. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. Like I enjoy preaching places and all that, but at the same, I love my liberty that I have, and I refuse to sacrifice that
Absolutely.
to be part of some club or movement or whatever. I'm not going to do that. And and again, there are I will not name the church. I will not name the preachers just because. But I literally this week I got invited to a meeting that was going to be very pro-Israel. the preacher that was preaching is very pro-Israel. And I told the pastor, I was like, I told him, I was like, I emailed him back and I was like, well, I don't know if you realize I've got a completely different position on this. And I don't want to I didn't want to just show up and be perceived as like spying or something like that. But I said, I'd love to come for the fellowship. I hadn't seen some of these people in a while in person. And he said, I knew your position when I asked. You're more than welcome to come. And I went there and I saw the man. And when he saw me, he got up and he gave me a hug, and he was wearing a tie with the Israeli flag on it. And you know what? And I didn't care, because we have a disagreement, but we have a mutual respect for each other. And him and that pastor, the speaker and the pastor, they were being very gracious towards me, because they feel like I'm an error. I feel like I was being gracious towards them as well, because I feel like they're an error. At the end of the day, they're right on the gospel, and so I don't mind. I think we need some of that, but I think one of the reasons these particular individuals are able to extend that grace, as I am able to extend that grace, is because too these are guys who have been politically blackballed in the IFB world. And you know what? There's a lot of Baptists in America who they're not connected politically, because they've been canceled and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? These guys, they stand by their convictions. They don't compromise on anything. And it's those guys that are capable to recognize where we should divide and where we should not divide. And it's the guys who are connected politically and popular. They're the sellouts. They're the one that make a bigger deal than they should. And I like big conferences and all that kind of stuff, but I think these things end up corrupting people more than anything. And I think that's too bad. So I'm thankful for people who are truly independent, even if they're not exactly like me. And I just don't like guys who just parrot some other preacher. I like individuals. And so even when I listen to some of your teaching on this too, is, I could tell, and I can recognize this. I can tell the people who are just repeating what they heard from somebody else, and the people who have, obviously we all learn from other people, but you can tell they actually went and got in the scriptures themselves too.
Right.
And they actually have something original to say about it. And so, I appreciated that. And so it shows me they're the real thing and not just parroting somebody. But so, yeah, but go ahead.
But come on now. So the big conference you went to, the pro-Israel conference, was a John Hagee conference?
No, I'm not that gracious. I'm not that gracious.
The benefit that you guys have over there is that there's so many independent fundamental Baptist churches over there, right? Yeah. So here in Australia, it's like a fishbowl. There's only about 200 independent fundamental Baptist churches here in Australia. And so we're a very small community. And so therefore, when you've got the majority of them all going in one way, and then you're like that salmon that's going upstream, you know what I mean? It's like, it's very, I would say it's very different here in that regard, whereas I guess you've got more opportunity perhaps to be a little bit more gracious and go to conferences and, have someone come preach. Well, I have a guy that preaches for us. He's an evangelist. He's a pre-trib, but I've had him come preach for me, and I love him. I think he's a great guy. And, so I don't want to be that guy that, if you don't agree exactly 100% down the line, just like me, I don't want anything to do with you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I want to try and be as gracious as I can. I just want someone, if someone comes to preach in my pulpit, I just want someone to come and just preach the word and preach it like they mean it and have a bit of fire and passion about it. You know what I mean? Because I really think we need, in our day-to-day, we need our pulpits filled with men that will just preach the word. You know what I mean? Like, been meditating a lot on Ezekiel chapter 2, where God tells Ezekiel to stand before him and preach whether people hear it or not. and he had to consume that book. He had to eat that book, and he had to preach from that book. And I find that that's just like us today. We've got a book, that we ought to be consuming and preaching the word, and we've got to preach it straight down the line. You know what I mean? We don't have to be hateful about it. We can still preach it with passion and with conviction. And I think that's what we need today. And if I'm ostracized by it, or if you're ostracized by it, then I'd rather stand before Jesus, right, on Judgment Day and hear him say, "Well done," right, and instead of standing before him ashamed and say, "Well, Lord, I didn't want to preach that, even though you showed me it. I didn't want to preach it because I was worried about I'll make down the road." You know what I mean? So, it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking a stand. I know it's got to be tough over there in Australia. It's more lonely over there, but I believe the Lord will bless you for it. And so I do appreciate you coming on the program. And if I have any Australian listeners and you're anywhere in that area, I don't know Australia very well, or even where you're at in Australia, I know Queensland. I just don't know where that is. It's a big country. It's all Australia to me. But
I think if you ask the average American where is Australia, I think a lot of them don't even know where it is, do they?
Well, does it even exist anyway? I've heard on the internet it doesn't even really exist. So, but
we're not mentioned in Revelation, no.
Yeah, well, and the truth is too. I mean, if I guess technically, if you're in Australia, shouldn't the video look more like this? Shouldn't that?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
At least we say tomato, not tomato, and aluminum.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
No, it's been great. I really do appreciate your ministry. I appreciate the podcast, Spirit of Prophecy podcast, and appreciate the opportunity to come on and really do count it a privilege. And I listen to you. I listen to Patrick Boyle. I like Patrick Boyle as well, and I've listened to Matt First, and it's just refreshing to know that again, there are guys out there. Even if we only get to do it this way and listen to each other this way, at least there's some guys that we can listen to and fellowship with in this way. And good books are being written. So I'm looking forward to again to reading that one as well. Where is that?
Yeah.
Looking forward to reading through that and just some really good. For me, it's like the way I've done it is I came to a position on it and then read books after it. I didn't go to a book first and read a book and then get necessarily swayed by that. I wanted to study the scripture, and then this probably would have been the only book, the Roland Rasmussen one, that I read before I actually studied it out. And I've read it since, and I agree with you on it and stuff like that. But
yeah, well, I guess another one we got to kind of have to get a shout out to is Wayne Williams, because he was another one from that time era, another trailblazer, and there's a lot of guys connected with him that also believe right on these things. And so you got to appreciate those guys from the previous generation that were ahead of their time, because it would have me scratching my head a little bit if this was just like a brand new thing in this generation. But there have been people, fundamental Baptists, it's just they typically got canceled from the big meetings and stuff. And so, but thankfully though, there were guys out there listening to what they had to say, and it paid off, because I know, Wayne Williams, he's gone now, I believe, but you got Matt First, and then there's other guys that were connected to him that are preaching right. I know that guys like Anderson went to Rasmussen's church for while. I think he got his parents saved, if I remember correctly. So, these guys, I believe they deserve a lot of credit for the movement in the right direction, and they didn't get to see it. They didn't get to see that, but I do believe in the near future, it's going to be much bigger when it comes to that. And I think we all owe them for that. We can call them kind of the original reformers of eschatology in the Baptist world. And so, but again, thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for watching this program, and make sure you like and share this. And so God bless you. We'll see y'all next time.
Amen. God bless.